So it's 13th of February 2020, and I'd just like to ask any viewers out there whether you've heard of the topic of mental illness. I mean, you don't hear about it, very much unless you I mean, you take an interest in these things, perhaps. But I mean, the basic idea is that sometimes that human beings they have things which make them unhappy or dysfunctional in certain ways, and that's termed an illness. It's a notion which has become more popular in the last few decades than it used to be. It used to be much more of a niche thing, and a few hundred years ago, it really wasn't such a big thing. There were other kind of notions which in its stead, such as sin, for instance, in the Christian era of a few centuries ago or longer. So previously there were other notions, such as such as the notion of sin, or soul distress, and happiness. Obviously, has always been a perennial theme of mankind. Unfortunately, and so we see in several centuries ago now, books like I think it's Robert Burton, his Anatomy of Melancholy, which is it's kind of like, I think it's a precursor to the modern medical approach in some ways, in that it attempts to treat it somewhat scientifically and medically. Because I mean, obviously there was a medical there was some medical approach to human unhappiness. Probably for as long as as long as human history has been recorded, probably, as far as I know. I mean, because it was always, it was well known to the Greeks that the mental health and physical health are very interrelated. Or human happiness and physical health are very, very interrelated. So that notion actually became lost a little bit in the Christian era, where the mind and soul dichotomy became much more pronounced. And so, as philosophers like Nietzsche observed, we became, very detached from the body and how it interrelates with the needs of the soul or the mind or the human personality, in a way that was potentially very detrimental. But there's also there's obviously strong traditions in which human happiness is dealt with very differently. In literature, for instance, or culture as the cure for man's ills. And obviously with Christianity, the notion of closeness to God, or purity of some kind, right action and cleanliness before God. And then in philosophy, we have the notion of harmony or wholeness, which is similar to the religious notion of holiness, right? So there we have these alternative traditions. But the modern idea of mental health, that particular phrase is a fairly newfangled invention. Only, I don't know, a couple of centuries, because there was psychiatry around a couple of centuries ago, but it was very, very minor in comparison to how it is today. Although in some ways, reputed to be much more brutal back then. But I mean, if you have heard of this, this concept, mental health, because I don't know, I suppose, you're probably too immersed in your kind of like daily activities and, and your romances and your good books, to really pay much attention. But, it is actually, becoming surprisingly, common throughout society that, that people, not only they're unhappy, but they're so-called mentally ill, and this is quite a widespread issue throughout society. We're talking, I don't know, thousands of people at least, worldwide. I mean, possibly even more. It's I mean, it could be tens of thousands, could be hundreds of thousands. I mean, I don't like to go into statistics because I think, it's just, as Joseph Stalin said, what did he say? He said he said something different. He said, uh, yeah, one death is tragedy, but a million is a statistic. But somebody else said, there's lies, damn lies, and then statistics. So I much rather understand the issues from a humane point of view, and from an inner logic, the inner logic of the human mind, a philosophical point of view, um, point of view that gets to grips with the real human issues, which could help people make, positive moves towards enlightenment in their own life and healing in their own life. So, I mean, so what is this idea? Mental health, or mental illness. Um, is it just unhappiness, or is it defined some other way? I mean, if you look into it, it's actually very, very strange. How this issue and how it's dealt with. It's shrouded in, or like cloaked in all these bizarre Latin names, labels, terminology, all these various disorders and diseases or illnesses. So there's literally like, I don't know, a million, possibly like 10 million of them. There's like almost as many illnesses or illness labels as there are human beings on the planet, which is good because I think everybody is kind of unique, so they need to be treated. They need their own label. So maybe that's progress. But it can distract at times from the central notion that we're trying to understand here. Which is human unhappiness, right? Because I mean, if people are going to become happy, they first need to correctly identify the problem, right? Maybe not get lost in a lot of like little alleyways, strange Latin names, which I'm tempted to say that they could distract from the central thing that they need to deal with, which is their happiness. Because if people start thinking that, how should I describe this? Some kind of intuition I have. It's a bit of a hazy idea at the moment. It's just I'm feeling around for it. But if you say that, like, if you imagine mental illness is like, I don't know, a rash, right? Just like a rash on your hand. Well, I mean, you can't treat human unhappiness just by applying a bit of cream to your hand, right? I mean, it may improve the rash, which is causing a bit of irritation and unhappiness, but it won't make your life from, completely unsatisfying to, fulfilled, and, true ecstasy and oneness with God, right? It's not going to do that. So when you compartmentalize things like this, say like 1 million or even 1 billion different illness labels out there now at the moment, then people, it tends to, some people seem to lose sight, of what they're, the issues. So, I mean, the doctors particularly, like, the doctors are some of them, they're so confused, by all their wonderful, they're on the face of it, admirable, Latin knowledge, but it does, play with their heads a little bit, because they could, so for instance, they could diagnose somebody with, schizophrenia, or bipolar, and it'll be so compartmentalized, in their mind that they completely lose sight of the main thread, which is, human happiness, whether the person is happy or not. For them, it seems, often it's become, it tends to become almost more like a rash, which, you need some very specialized kind of like, physical kind of, intervention, like, putting, oil into a car, which is running low on oil or something like that. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? If you have any experience with this, with this issue, well, for instance, if you're labeled schizophrenic, the treatment will strangely often, require making the person very more unhappy somehow, which seems extremely counterintuitive, for what is considered to be a mental illness. You will literally be, taken away from your home, put in somewhere with complete strangers who you can't really trust, particularly the nurses, and you'll be told that you're pretty low quality person, or fed, tacitly fed that message, and well, obviously, if you're being basically held there against your will, it's it has strong resonances, with strong similarities to the idea of incarceration in a prison, for committing a crime, which is unfortunate if it's happening to you. So yeah, so it tends to, the treatment tends to require making the person, much more unhappy than they were originally. That's what happened in my case. So it's, strangely, kind of like compartmentalized. It's, for a start, it's not sure what it's not sure what it is. It's not clear what it is, because if you have a rash, right, you can see it. You can see the rash. It probably itches a bit, and you put the cream on, the rash becomes nice and smooth. Beautiful, beautiful skin again. But if you have a mental illness, it's not clear what it is. And yet, in our system, it's so removed from the basic, fundamental human thing which you would expect, a mental illness to be about, which is, human happiness. Instead, you have these kind of strange, list of symptoms and diagnostic tools, you know, which seem strangely irrelevant, and disturbingly irrelevant. So there's lots and lots of them, and I don't know. It just seems strange to me. There's just so many of these diseases which are totally invisible, and I mean, a few hundred years ago, there were only like about, like I said, say there were about two or three, maybe four. Now there's like about 7 billion. It's because like there was melancholy. There's melancholy. Humors. There was I don't know. Can't think of the others. It's been a long time since I read Robert Burton's The Anatomy of Melancholy, or Hippocrates. So they're all, I don't know, phlegmatic humors or something. So there's, I don't know, there's melancholy. There was maybe it's pretty much melancholy was the only mental disease there was in those days. Sexual repression wasn't invented until the early 19th century. You think that would be another main one back in the Victorian era, especially, but that hadn't actually been invented in those days. So, I mean, why all these, enormous number of new diseases which, are totally invisible and difficult to pin down? because it seems ironic because, at the same time with all these new diseases, we find people becoming, kind of like more and more similar. Everybody reduced to kind of like, the proverbial mass man, just like a cog in the big machine, and obviously with the internet and the rise of, increasingly interconnected society, in many ways everybody kind of thinks alike, and the traditional cultures, indigenous cultures, broken down. But on the other hand, we have like about 8 billion, 9 billion actually new disease labels, which most people only have about 4 or 5 or 6 of them. These diseases. So there's obviously a lot of discrepancy here. Where at the same time as everybody seems so just bog standard, like um, lowest common denominator. um, 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 well, um, okay, let me just add another idea to this. Well, in philosophy, you have the idea of the good life, right? In philosophy, you have the idea of the good life. So basically, there's a search for like one cure for everything, everyone. There's a search for one cure for everyone. So basically, in a way, it's like one disease and it's human life, and the cure is philosophy or the search for the good life or the good life itself. Um, Whereas in psychiatry, the idea of the good life doesn't actually pop up very much, and the idea of happiness doesn't pop up much either, strangely. Uh, and instead, there's a lot of like, it seems to me, a lot of intellectual confusion involved. It's like really subjecting your brain to a good battering if you go into a psychiatric office, because they will bore you to death with all these poxy Latin names and strange diagnostic criteria. Well, I say strange, but it's quite vulgar as well, and not particularly inspiring. Um, but it's a bit frightening, especially when you're being held down by two, you know, um, you know, overweight nurses, with a needle, obviously with your pants down, so you can. Um, 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 so yeah, it's been intimidating, but I mean, it's also just very like boring and like a total mind, a mind, like a mind game almost, because you know. They're more interested, if you have like, just the best imaginary friend ever, they're more interested just simply that you have an imaginary friend and that they don't, than, that your imaginary friend is just great, and he grants your wishes, and he gives you strange ideas and, things to do when you are otherwise just like a total loose end, and feel ground down by the machine. Um, so they would, the psychiatrist, like I say, the doctor, just to state again, would be more interested that you had an imaginary friend, then the quality of the imaginary friend, and how it impacted, positively or negatively on your life, which just is like a total inversion of the way that I would see it, or any sensible person I think would see it. And certainly, back a few hundred years ago, when Swedenborg was all the rage across Europe, seeing like all the angels of heaven, in their great host, and inspiring the intellectual classes, out of their scientific, dogmatic slumbers back in those days. Even though they were a bit like hung up with their so-called science back in the I don't know, Swedenborg's days, they also were just totally wowed and blown away by his wonderful imaginary friends. Whereas with my imaginary friend, it's they don't want to make me a success. They don't want to make me the talk of the town, or even Europe or America, or India or somewhere, China, Japan. I love Japan. They they're not interested in marketing my um, you know my great winged heroes, um, um, protectors, my holy guardian angel, as Aleister Crowley used to call it. um, um, there's literally been almost no marketing help from the psychiatric establishment on that front, which is very sad if you think about it. Because after all the how I've assisted their careers, it's like literally a year I was playing along with their little game of doctors and nurses, um, um, well, actually, 12 years, coming on 13 if you include the community treatment orders. But I'm talking about when my physical integrity and safety was in jeopardy, and I was held captive. But, yeah, so just to say, just for the record, Swedenborg, came up with his like masterpiece, put it on a psychiatrist's desk. He would probably, not be, the doctor would not get down on his knees and say, "You are the best, the best fellow and most cultured individual I've ever met." They would instead say, they would, probably wink at one of the nurses, bar the exits. um, and you would not be seeing his next religious tract. on the market, ever. Well, I exaggerate a bit because, I've been writing mad poetry for a couple of years now, or a few years even, and I've gotten almost nothing but positive reactions from that angle. So I give them credit for that. But on the other hand, like I say, their diagnostic criteria and their actual behavior towards young men particularly, or probably young women as well, who do have just brilliant imaginary friends, but haven't yet completed their masterpiece, their novel, their prize-winning novel yet. Well, they're quite draconian, and will probably try and stop it from occurring, either wittingly or unwittingly. Well, I'm going to have to round out this discussion of the topic in general, because there's only like 15 minutes left of the video, and the point of this video is, in fact, to introduce my new masterpiece, which is currently available on Amazon, which is the second installment of the Gaslit by a Madman trilogy, which will culminate eventually in a long philosophical book, also containing poetry and other articles on madness, philosophy, and society, which will probably be about between 500 and 600 pages. And it's already pretty much, most of it's written, but I don't know when, or even if it will be released. But this is the second installment. The first installment was Gaslit by a Madman, Illuminated Poems, which is mostly poems taken from my first book, Madness, Form of Love, released in 2018. And it's just 36 quite, coherent poems, each conveying a good quality message in mostly quite elaborate language, with good mastery of English, but also with some William Blake-esque illustrations, updated for the modern age. So they're just basically me sticking pretty photos and pictures I found from across the internet in a bit of a collage to illustrate the ideas of the poem. And it actually makes quite a polished and lovely gift, for anybody, which, beautifies the human spirit, while also, delving deep into the agonies of some of the most, suffering people in society, and often hidden away suffering, in society. Um, so, it's a very humane present for anybody or for yourself. This Easter perhaps, and it has a Christian theme to it. Although the number 66 is also highlighted because um, I'm 36, which is 6 times 6, and also because I like to blend things a bit. So we have some more ambivalent or even like demonic kind of um, uh, ideas played with, because it's the Jungian shadow, it's the Freudian id, it's the Blakean marriage of heaven and hell, right? Or the god of Braxis, you know. Um, yeah, and I mean there may be an image of Charlie Manson thrown in there as well, or two, with some apologies for that. Um, um, so that's my first book, and I do suggest you check it out. Very easy to read, very accessible, lovely colored images, make a great gift to children, and not too much to digest, because there's so much information out there nowadays. Why not go for something which is a bit more, just concentrated, polished, lovingly crafted, a lot of pain, going into it, and years of real struggle, to create this very short burst of illumination, um, and hopefully collective healing. Um, it's I would say that it will be collector's item in years to come. I dare say. Um, and and then the book that I'm releasing now is a collection of famous quotes about madness, because I'm still trying to make a name for myself as an independent, um, important philosopher of the age. So I piggyback a little, on the great history of anti-psychiatric thinkers, or thinkers about madness, or thinkers about human life in general. I piggyback a little by stealing a few lines in their work, and plastering a lot of um, gory and well, not gory, but very vivid and quite cartoonish imagery, but also, well, yeah, it is quite brutal actually. If I'm honest, if I think about it, um, so a lot of quite cartoonish, but also quite barbaric imagery. Uh, to truly bring these quotes to life and hammer them into the reader's mind. And I think I get told that this isn't a meme. What the heck are you posting this here? I hear that an awful lot. When I try and advertise these things online, because they don't like self promotion either. So, bad books, both ways on that account. Firstly, they're not proper memes. They're just like child scribbles, and cries for help. And on the other hand, You know, I have my face, my handsome face, plastered all over them as well. You know, very garishly. So it's it's quite a bloodbath, as you can imagine, because you know people nowadays can be a bit mean. Um, um, and particularly if they have good qualifications, you know, for it, you know, um, and uh, so it's over 100 pages, and it's like I said, it's mostly just you know a little brief quote with a whole page of illustration. So it's not the most by the book philosophical treatise that is going to qualify for most scholarly journals out there, or I mean, I would like to say that, you know, I'm really trying to claim, to be the Plato of our time here, but Plato was, most philosophers are very misunderstood in their own day, so it's possible that I will be dismissed again as just like a child scribbler, lunatic. Um, uh, you know, you can't control his outbursts online. Um, but that's very unfair. And as they say, time trieth truth, right? So, in about, you know, 2,500 years from now, I'm very confident that I will undergo at least a partial rehabilitation. Okay, I'm putting in about 2,500 years because that is. I mean, I don't know. My Greek history is bad. I mean, that's a weak spot. My history is bad because I could not give a piss about facts. That's one thing that I don't like. Um, you know, statistics, facts. You know, who are we to say what happened 2,500 years before we were in nappies? It's just it just seems a bit arrogant to me. So I don't put too much seriousness in it and dedicate too much of my barrel to fit to holding that kind of data. Um, but I'm thinking that Plato is BC, right? So that's over 2,000 years. So it could be at least 2,000 years before people like reading this book in great numbers. If I'm honest. Uh, um, but by then, I expect to have my cartoons in every self-respecting old-fashioned library. Um, and it's called Dr. MADMAX Quotes because there's only a couple of minutes left of the video. And there's also some extended aphorisms inspired by Nietzsche, at the end. There's a more detailed snapshot of my kind of philosophical approach, which you can see, just piles and reams more of if you wait for the next installment, the piece de resistance on madness, philosophy, and society. But this one also makes, it's a lovely gift, particularly for children, because to me, philosophy is basically for teenagers. To me, basically, the whole of philosophy is just for teenagers, in my opinion, or possibly, under nines, because by then you should really have thought, what you're doing, in life and what is out there, so you can basically go and do it, And I'm going for Philosopher Kings here, I'm not going for, lecturers in philosophy. I'm not hoping my readers are going to be lecturers, professors, God no. I want, the next, how do I put this? The next Alexander the Great, right? My brother's name is Alexander, and so hopefully I'll eventually get him to listen to a single word that I say, and he could be my Alexander the Great, and conquer Europe for me, because I'm getting a bit past it. Okay, thanks for listening, and please check out my other videos. You see some variation in style throughout them, and one of my stylistic approaches after effect of the drugs there, medication. Sorry. One of my stylistic approaches is a kind of like well, obviously huge variation, attempt to blend, true multicultural blend, and also a lot of whimsy and madness, divine madness, Dionysus the crucified, Dionysus and Ariadne. A pagan revival. No, sorry, just kidding there. But a Christian revival, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to go and get Nietzsche's religion of the future.